Election officials are now admitting that there are some pretty widespread problems out there in our 2024 election. And this is curious because just 4 years ago, they told us that there were no widespread problems. Actually, the evolution of that fake 2020 election was perfect narrative went something like this. It was like, oh, there's no fraud at all. It never happens. Okay. And they're like, oh, it was a little bit of fraud. Okay. It was, okay, a lot of fraud, but it wasn't widespread. Oh, actually, it was widespread. So now it wasn't widespread enough to influence the outcome of the election. And then we said, yeah, it was. Look around. Tens of thousands of votes, hundreds of thousands. So it was widespread enough to impact the outcome of the election. So then they abandoned that one. And then they went forward and they said, no court of law found that it was consequential enough to reverse the election. You say, oh, okay. So there you go, right? So the rigged lawfare that went forward, that manipulated the election rules, that then made it impossible for Trump or the Republicans to challenge any of these things because there were already prior findings. There were already arguments about standing. It was not ripe. Okay, if they filed the election claim too soon, they said, no, you can't file it too soon. There's no evidence of fraud. It's not ripe enough. So then they said, okay. So then they file it after the election and they said, oh, sorry, you filed too late. You should have filed it early. Now latches apply and you can't recover because of your delay. And we said, what? And then other people sued and said, we weren't a party to any of this. And so what about us? Can we sue? No, you don't have standing either. So just eat it. And the Supreme Court snubbed their nose at a bunch of Republican attorney generals and didn't do anything about it. So, of course, it was rigged. Of course, the CIA was involved in this. CIA contractors were literally colluding with the Biden administration. Anthony Blinken, who's our now Secretary of State. It is pervasive, but they told us there was no widespread fraud anywhere. Turns out there is. You see here, there is widespread problems, and I will equate this to fraud. Now, the problems are going to be, you might even say structural. You might even say they're bureaucratic. And there's a good faith reason why our government is incompetent, because they're incompetent. And that's what happens when you get gigantic, disgusting bureaucracies that are in control of everything. But now it's with the mail system. And so let's go through this. Now, we know that you go to the DMV or the post office. A lot of these entities, these institutions, look at the FBI for one, have major problems, systemic problems through them. But some of these problems are not just, we can't just write them off, right? I get so tired of this excuse. Like, it's just a government and government just sucks. So that's why they're corrupt. We saw this with the Secret Service all the time. Oh no, maybe they're just boneheads. Maybe they're just idiots. They just can't figure out to cover a roof. And so there's no ill will. They're just incompetent. Okay, they get that excuse all the time. And that's pathetic. We should expect much more of our government to just say, we have some of the dumbest people in charge who are running things, and that status quo is sufficient. It's insane. So when you see things that are actually broken, you have to ask yourself if that is intentional. Did they want Trump dead? Yeah, they did. Many people did. There's videos of people saying, I wish they shot him in the head. And then we just get to use a scapegoat of incompetence and it solves everything. Same situation is happening here, right? So we can't fix anything. That's why the border's broken. We're trying really hard in all these other places, but we just can't do it because they're so incompetent. Mail-in voting is one of these places where they can put their thumb on the scale and cause institutional problems, structural problems, just like we saw in the state of Arizona when we had Kari Lake running and the day of the election, the machine stopped working for huge portions of our county. It was nuts. And it was at various locations. We went through the numbers here. We pulled it up. We showed that there was like Lutheran church, 50% problems. Something Christian location, 50% problems. All of them on the outskirts of town, all of them in red areas. These are structural problems that cause a tipping of the scales. And then you put in people like Katie Hobbs, who was the Secretary of State at the time, right? And she is now also a fake referee who's just like Jocelyn Benson and Shenna Bellows and Jenna Griswold. So all of them are in it as purposeful warriors to go after their political opponents. And so now we're seeing them now admit it in this document. It says state and local election officials from across the country on Wednesday, they suddenly warned that there are problems with the nation's mail delivery system that threaten to disenfranchise voters in the upcoming presidential election. Now, telling the head of the U.S. Postal Service that it has not fixed persistent deficiencies. And there's a phrase going around that says, the point of the system is what it does. I believe that's attributable to Mark Andreessen, the billionaire. The point of the system is what it does. Okay, there are problems. There are deficiencies. You're going to have a difficult time collecting these ballots from rural locations. Why are these persistent deficiencies allowed to persevere? Now, in an alarming letter, the AP reports, the officials said that over the past year, including the just concluded primary season, mailed ballots that were postmarked on time and were received by local election offices days after the deadline to be counted. These votes are not being counted. They're being disenfranchised. And we know how much the left hates disenfranchising anybody. They hate it so much, they don't even want you to have ID because it's hard for certain people of certain colors to get ID. Racist. They also noted that properly addressed election mail was being returned to them as undeliverable. Oh, properly addressed election mail is coming back. Oh, they're like, oh, this is a Trump voter, undeliverable. Put that in that pile. Another one, put it over there. No, we can't deliver that. Nope, that one too. Put it over. Oh, Harris. Perfect. Okay, put this on. Actually, give this to FedEx, okay, so they can deliver it. So we make sure it gets there. A problem that could automatically send voters to inactive status through no fault of their own, potentially creating chaos when those voters show up to cast a ballot. Now, the officials also said that repeated outreach to the Postal Service to resolve these issues had failed, and that the widespread nature of the problems made it clear that these were not one-off mistakes, okay, or a problem with specific facilities. Instead, it demonstrated a pervasive lack of understanding and enforcement of Postal Service policies among employees. Now, the letter to the Postmaster General, Louis DeJoy, she's perfect for the Harris administration, of Joy, Louis of Joy, wonder if this person is as hysterical as Kamala is, came from two groups that represent top election administrators in all 50 states. They told all 50 states, they said, we have not seen improvement or concerted efforts to remediate our concerns, and we implore you to take immediate and tangible corrective action to address the ongoing performance issues with the mail. Failure to do so will limit voter participation and trust in the election process. And so you ask yourself, I wonder where these problems are isolated. Where are they being located? Are they in Arizona? Are they in Georgia? Are they in Pennsylvania? Yeah, probably. The Postal Service, all 50 states, said on Wednesday, and on Wednesday, they reiterated the Postmaster General's assurances. She said, we're well positioned to swiftly deliver election mail, despite being in the midst of a network modernization that has caused some delivery hiccups. They're admitting it. Yeah, it's weird. If it says Trump on the ballot, when we scan it, something happens. It's weird. It goes right into the shredder. Mail is currently being delivered in 2.7 days. The post office is still urging voters don't procrastinate. They said, we're ready to deliver. We were successful in 2020 delivering a historic volume of mail-in ballots. Yeah, even the fake ones too. They delivered so many of those too. Here, have some more. Also in 2022, and they're going to do it again in 2024. Oh, great. Adrian Marshall said, we're printing them right now. The two groups, the National Association of Secretaries of State and the National Association of State Election Directors, said local election officials in nearly every state are receiving timely postmarked ballots after Election Day and outside the 3 to 5 business day that they claim is the standard for first-class mail. Now, the letter comes after 2 weeks after the postmaster said that we're ready to handle a flood of the mail-in ballots because Trump, even though Trump is continuing to sow doubts in the elections, because it was rigged. Now, that year, amid the global pandemic, election officials reported sending just over 69 million ballots, a substantial increase. And both sides are talking to people to bank their votes. Now, Postal Service officials also told reporters last month that almost 98% of ballots were returned to election officials within 3 days. They like to get closer to 100%, but here it is. Officials in rural states have been critical of the Postal Service for years. Like, they'll take care of California, New York, and the blue states. But if you're in the rural areas, wow, no, they've consolidated their mail processing centers. So the rural places, which tend to be more red, not like the suburban cities or the urban cities that are very blue, In addition to being signed by the current and incoming presidents for both groups, the leaders of the groups that represent the local election officials in 25 states were listed. The election officials warned that any election mail returned to an election office as undeliverable could trigger a process outlined in federal law for maintaining an accurate list of registered voters. That means a voter could be made inactive and they got to verify their address. Now, in Kansas, he said the recent past president sent his own letter. He said nearly 1,000 ballots from his state's August 6th primary election couldn't be counted because they arrived too late. 1,000 ballots and more are continuing to come in. So all this stuff is just sitting on some postal office worker's desk. Interesting. Weird. Almost like it's intentional. Now, Schwab posted, he said the Pony Express is more efficient at this point. They're just not getting the ballots back, right? People put them in the mail. The post office is not delivering them. Schwab and other Kansas election officials have also said that some ballots arrive on time, but without postmarks. Okay, so then other people are just throwing, like other postal service people are probably just picking them up, which keeps them from being counted. What's more, Schwab told The Joy, local postal clerks have told election officials that they can't add postmarks later, even if it's clear that the Postal Service handled the ballot ahead of the mail-in deadline. Oh, man, it's a problem. If these just don't have postmarks, or if these do, we'll count them, we won't count them. It's really good to be the scoreboard keeper. Kansas will count ballots postmarked on or before Election Day. The Republican-controlled legislature created a grace period. In their letter, election officials also said colleagues across the U.S. have reported that Postal Service staff, from managers to mail carriers, are uninformed about the service's policies for election mail. So all the Postal Service people are like, I don't know what to do with this. There is no amount of proactive communication election officials can do to account for their inability to meet their own timelines. They need a committed partner in the Postal Service, not people who are going to, just through the commonplace government incompetence, fail to count the votes, right? This is why people have criticisms about mail-in voting, because of crap like this. Now, we made these reservations and concerns known in 2020, but they told us we were crazy. It's ridiculous. Everything got delivered. Everything got counted. No illegals voted. There's no dead people voting. Ballot rolls are perfect. And there was no manipulation of the electoral laws by guys like Mark Elias or others. There was no illegal funds that were being pumped in by guys like Mark Zuckerberg. Maybe not illegal, but basically. And then we have the censorship from the FBI. Add in the collusion with the CIA. The election was obviously rigged.